Hey there, BookTube. Noah. Everyone who reads and must converses the channel, thanks for stopping by for the wrap-up of James Joyce Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Now, this is not the real wrap-up, the full wrap-up. Codex Cantina is going to just kind of take a look at it as a whole. I'll give my little take on it before we just a short take of, like, what I think about the work a little bit before I really just jump into chapter 5. That's what this is about. I'm going to knock out chapter 5, which is where the majority of substance and what Joyce is really getting at with this work, the final, densest chapter for sure. So, James Joyce was nothing if not pretentious. Okay? I mean, this guy really thought highly of himself. So I'm going to say that first off, to just say that, if Stephen Dedalus is an analog for Joyce in this work, well, Stephen is not just the someone who may be the most intelligent person to come through, the school that he goes to or something like that. He might be the most intelligent person on the face of the planet, but I don't think that it's necessarily like that. I think that Joyce knew exactly what he was doing. Joyce is a very smart person, and Joyce knew what he was doing, and Stephen Dedalus is not James Joyce. Stephen Dedalus is his own character and has his own quality, and apart from Joyce. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, and also with that, Joyce is a genius, but Joyce is an intellectual genius. Sorry. Joyce is a genius in the way that he took a very long time and got very deep and put a lot into his writing, and something that a lot of writers wouldn't be able to do. It's amazing. It is great. There's another type of genius, the type of genius of Mozart, the type of genius of William Blake. And that kind of genius is someone who will be inspired and stay in a certain place, and then in a sort of automatic writing from being guided from a higher place, bring down something that is pure art, pure beauty to our world. And so I see those two different types of geniuses, and that's why I add that qualifier that James Joyce is an intellectual genius. And not to take anything away from Joyce, I think Joyce knew he was an intellectual genius. When it comes down to it, Joyce would have loved to be, William Blake, for sure. In anything that I've studied and seen, Joyce held Blake in the highest esteem, but he was not William Blake. He didn't do what William Blake did, and he didn't do it the way that William Blake did it. So, just that being said. So, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 5. So, at the end of chapter 4, my last video, Stephen Dedalus had his epiphany. And his epiphany was brought about by an experience in life, that he was here to be an artist, and he was here to share, to mine what was within and bring that out in a beautiful way, and he's striving for beauty. So I'm going to jump back and forth between the book and also the annotations here just a little bit, because I have just things that I want to touch on that are in both, but it might be a little bit of a hodgepodge. So bear with me, but because I think that I can that I got some really good places with this. So Stephen has given up at the end of 4 in his epiphany the idea of being part of the church, which was a huge influence on Stephen's life and what he was devoted to, drawn to. as far as his vocation and what he might want to do with his life. Be part of the church and go for divine inspiration. That is definitely part of what Stephen was interested in for a large part of his life. But he saw that that was not his path. And then in chapter 5, we have this scene where he's talking to the dean of admissions. And the dean is sitting there talking to him. And he says, when may we expect to have something from you on the aesthetic question? He asked Stephen. From me? Stephen asked in astonishment. I stumble on an idea once a fortnight if I'm lucky. These questions are very profound, Mr. Dedalus, said the dean. It is like looking down from the cliffs of Moher into the depths. Many go down into the depths and never come up. Only the trained diver can go down into those depths and explore them and come to the surface again. If you mean speculation, sir, said Stephen, I also am sure that there is no such thing as free thinking, inasmuch as all thinking must be bound by its own laws. Ha, says the dean. For my purpose, I can only at present work by the light of one or two ideas from Aristotle or Aquinas. I see. I quite see your point. I need them only for my own use and guidance until I've done something for myself in their light. If the lamp smokes or smells, I shall try to trim it. But if it does not give light enough, I shall sell it to buy another. So there Stephen is using metaphorical language to talk about ideas. And in this scene, he's talking about a different type of light than the kind of system and structure that the dean is talking about. Who is a Jesuit? It's a Jesuit school. So, what's he talking about? And I think what he's talking about is pure inspiration. In this, we see Stephen very much going for a inspiration and what beauty is all about. Stephen is talking to a friend named Davin. And he says, the soul is born, he said vaguely, first in those moments I told you of. It has a hollow and dark birth, more mysterious than the birth of the body. When the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets. So, allegories to Daedalus, the myth, for sure, flying. But what he's really talking about is nets that serve, societally speaking, to hold people in their place, to keep people in their place, and to give them a structure. And the artist abhors that kind of structure and limitation. An artist insists upon freedom of thought and freedom of expression. So in this, Stephen is using, and Joyce is using the idea of flight and flying within those nets, or using those nets in his inspirational flight. And in the annotations, it calls out the Book of Urizen by William Blake. Till a web, dark and cold, throughout all the tormented elements stretched, from the sorrows of Urizen's soul, and the web is a female in embryo. None could break the web, no wings of fire. So twisted the cords, and so knotted the meshes, twisted like the human brain, and they called it the net of religion. So, Joyce is definitely using that there. And Blake shows up a couple of times in this chapter. Stephen is making use of um, Aristotle, Aristotle writings and ideas. No shortage of Greek in this book, of course, and Daedalus, of course. But Plato as well, Saint Thomas Aquinas, and and others. So the next thing I wanted to touch on was just very awesome. And this is when Stephen is actually trying to convey to his friend, another friend, what his idea of beauty is. And the friend's name is Lynch. So Aquinas, said Stephen, says that the beautiful, that is beautiful, the apprehension of which pleases. So things that please you and things that you desire for, acquiring that or apprehending that, that's what is beautiful. And Lynch nods. I remember that. He uses the word visa to cover aesthetic apprehensions of all kinds, whether through sight or hearing or through any other avenue of apprehension. So he is going on to Plato. Plato, I believe, said that beauty is the splendor of truth. I don't think that that has a meaning, but the true and the beautiful are akin. Truth is beheld by the intellect, which is appeared by the most satisfying relations of the intelligible, a harmony, a relationship. Beauty is beheld by the imagination, which is appeased by the most satisfying relations of the sensible, things that you can make sense of, even just symbolically. The first step in the direction of truth is to understand the frame and scope of the intellect itself. And he goes on to say, the first step in the direction of beauty is to understand the frame and scope of the imagination, symbols, to comprehend the act itself of its aesthetic appreciation. Is that clear? And Lynch says, well, what is beauty? Is that the best that you can do? Well, let us take woman, for example. The Greek, the Turk, the Chinese, the Hottentot, the Copt, they all admire different types of female beauty. That seems to be a maze out of which we cannot escape. So another allusion to the Daedalus myth there. I see, however, two ways out. One is this hypothesis, that every physical quality admired by men and women is in direct connection with the manifold functions of women for the propagation of the species. So that is nature, right? That beauty, the first hypothesis is that beauty is natural and comes from nature and comes from the functions of beings. And in that way, everything that is handsome or beautiful about the male to the female would be nothing but physical prowess, the kind of things that make a man beneficial for the human race itself, propagation of the species, protection, and that kind of thing. So Stephen rejects that one. He says, nature and just nature itself is not an adequate explanation of beauty to me. And then he says his second hypothesis. This is the other way out, that through the same object may not seem beautiful to all people who admire a beautiful object find in it certain relations which satisfy and coincide with the stages themselves of all aesthetic apprehension. These relations of the sensible, visible to you through one form, and to me through another, must therefore be necessary qualities of beauty. Totally necessary qualities of beauty. That the relations between the things we can make sense of, symbols, and just any kind of thing that we sensibly apprehend and make sense to our imagination. That is a necessary quality of beauty in that second way, and that is more close to what Stephen's idea is. So Stephen goes on in this way, pulls up St. Thomas Aquinas and his definition of beauty and that kind of thing. First off, the first step is apprehending something in and of itself, and seeing something as a quality of its selfhood. And that is true as far as it goes, for sure. You wouldn't have a quality, an idea of something being beautiful without isolating it, right? Without it being an in and of itself. So, a beautiful person is beautiful in their self, in their selfhood, as opposed to the wall or, the tree that they're standing beside or whatever. And then, what is followed after just apprehension of the thing in of itself, its wholeness of itself, its selfhood, is the apprehension of that thing as a complex, multiple, divisible, separable, made up of its parts, the result of its parts and their sum, harmonious. So it is that the sum is greater than all of its parts, right? And those parts are working together harmoniously to create that thing, that thing that we're finding beautiful. So he's talking about the process of understanding that something is beautiful, the process of apprehending beauty. And then the last thing is claritas. So with that kind of, this next step is the artistic discovery and representation of the divine purpose in anything, or a force of generalization which would make the aesthetic image a universal one, to make it outshine its proper conditions. And so that kind of thing is the supreme quality that is felt by the artist when the aesthetic image is first conceived in his imagination. The mind that conceives of something beautiful after going through and calling it out and seeing what is beautiful. Then when taking away from the actual thing and seen in just the imagination of the artist, and then that is illuminated inside the artist. The artist then, can turn it around and expand on it and bring out the why that the artist finds that thing beautiful, and or why that thing is beautiful in and of itself, and also the ways that the different parts work together, all about it. Go into it in a very insightful way. And then at the end, we see Stephen, the end of this part, we see Stephen kind of coming into contact with a girl that he had judged harshly as kind of being, pandering to a priest, and maybe there was some kind of, illicit kind of exchange or relationship there. It was all within Stephen's mind. We don't know if it was anything real or not, but it was something that Stephen did feel a kind of a judgment on, and that kind of thing. And he runs into her in the street with her girlfriends, and she's there, and he sees her, and he's in this kind of, he's had his realization now. And so when he apprehends her, this is what he thinks. And if he had judged her harshly, if her life were a simple rosary of hours, her life simple and strange as a bird's life, happy in the morning, restless all day, tired at sundown, her heart simple and willful as a bird's heart. And so when Stephen is now looking at her like that like, you know, maybe it is all in my head and all that kind of thing, and this person is just in and of herself this beautiful, simple, creature that, is beautiful and awesome. I see that as Stephen expanding himself and actually putting into practice in his life the kind of aesthetics that he's talking about there. And in that way, he's becoming more expansive. He's able to see beauty in more and more things, not letting his emotions get in the way or something like that, right? All right, so Stephen, is going around, and there's just so many allusions to so many different things in this book. And here, that's why I say, when it comes down to it, Stephen Dedalus, is not Joyce. Joyce, Stephen Dedalus would be, the smartest person in Ireland, for sure. Somebody walking around in that has all these kind of allusions, all these kind of references to other things in his head all the time, and just easily called to mind. There's no way, you would be a complete genius for that. So, with the amount of time that Joyce took to write his books, of course, he did a lot of study and a lot of revision and a lot of additions and a lot of all that kind of thing. So, here's where Stephen actually, we have in the 5th chapter, begins to create something and actually embody the artist. A glow of desire kindled again in his soul and fired and fulfilled all his body. Conscious of desire, she was waking from odorous sleep. Conscious of his desire, she was waking from odorous sleep, the temptress of his villanelle. Her eyes, dark and with a look of languor, were opening to his. Her nakedness yielded to him, radiant, warm, odorous, and lavish-limbed, enfolded him like a shining cloud, enfolded him like water with a liquid life, and like a cloud of vapor, or like waters circumfluent in space, the liquid letters of speech, symbols of the element of mystery, flowed forth over his brain. So there is what I saw as him describing inspiration itself as a woman, inspiration itself as a she, and in that way, Sophia, the divine Sophia, which is also a very Greek, Platonic idea. I love that, like a cloud of vapor or like water circumfluent in space, the liquid letters of speech, symbols of the element of mystery, flowed forth over his brain. And then he writes a villanelle. A villanelle is a certain type of poem that is 19 lines long, that also has only two, an A-B, A-B-A, 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 A-B-A-A, that's the rhyme scheme. So even though I've heard it kind of said, and I thought this, at first, that this kind of writing was not very great, the kind of poem, the kind of villanelle that Stephen is doing at the end of this, it is actually a very, very difficult structure to write, especially in English. It is a very difficult structure to adhere to when writing a poem. So Stephen is very ambitious. Stephen has very high level of ambition inside of him. And so Stephen, just there at the end here, I'm going to touch on another part. There's with Cranley again, he's talking, and he says, Stephen says, "You've made me confess the fears that I have, but I will tell you what I do not fear. I do not fear to be alone, or to be spurned for another, or to leave whatever I have to leave. And I am not afraid to make a mistake, even a great mistake, a lifelong mistake, and perhaps an eternity too." Cranley, now grave again, slowed his pace and said, "Alone, quite alone. You have no fear of that, and you know what that word means? Not only to be separate from all others, but to have not even one friend." And Stephen says, "I will take the risk." So that I think is very, very much Stephen's attitude, and the attitude of the artist, that you have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to risk it all. So Stephen is willing to take risks and to risk it all for his art. And then we see the freedom of association. Here at the very end, he went to the library, tried to read 3 reviews, useless. She's not out yet. Am I alarmed? About what? That she will never be out again? Talking about the inspiration. Blake wrote, "I wonder if William Bond will die, for assuredly he is ill. Alas, poor William! I was once at a diorama in Rotunda. At the end were pictures of big knobs. Along them William Ewart Gladstone, just then dead. Orchestra played, 'Oh, Willie, we have missed you.'" So there, in just that little piece right there, we have 3 different associations being made. Stephen is now freely associating all kinds of stuff, all different mediums of artistic expression. He's now freely associating that, even just very quickly, and trying to find that beauty through the associations, find that beauty that he can then create from the different mediums. The first is a poem by William Blake called William Bond. The second is after Hamlet's speech, the court jester's skull, which has been thrown up by the clowns who are digging Ophelia's grave. Something that is said there. And then the third thing, a diorama, which is a mode of scenic presentation. So I just thought that very, very interesting, that he's using over and over. William Everett Gladstone was a minister of England that had just died, and then he goes to a song by an American songwriter, "Oh, Willie, we have missed you." So in those, 4 different references there, maybe 5, all William. William Blake wrote that poem. William Bond is the subject of the poem. "Oh, Willie, we have missed you" is that American song. And, it's just overload for the intellect. And that's what the artist does, is just freely associate so much that the intellect is transcended, not for lack of a better word. What is it? The intellect can't just sit there and make sense of it. When it comes down to it, it breaks through into something else, what we call inspiration. And Stephen is now actively looking for that inspiration. And Stephen goes on with his life. So I hope you enjoyed this book too. This was a lot of fun to go through. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Definitely worth a read. And my copy here, 220 pages. For 220 pages, it's probably the densest fiction work that I've come across in a long time. It's amazing that Joyce can do what he did. There's so much that we didn't touch on There's so much that wasn't said. Joyce really benefits uh, the reader that's going to dig into his work and find and search out all the little allusions that he's making and things like that. So, hope you have a good one, BookTube. Very cool. And I'll catch you on the next video. Bye bye.